it's a little bit of a loaded topic, and there's some paradox in it, and it's sort of like there's a little it's the problem with talking about it is that it can there's a certain point in saying it's not about being a better person, right? There's a reason for saying that. And that's the words that I used. It's not about being a better person, because we can approach the spiritual journey with the attachment to outcome. If that's what's coming through our seeking, the attachment to outcome really is about circumstance, trying to improve circumstance. And if we think it's about making ourselves a better person, then essentially we're looking at changing our biological reactions, where we are, I don't know, healthier, where we are stronger, where we're better looking, whether we're smarter, whether we're kinder, whether we're, more financially successful, whether we have more business acumen, trying to look at anger management. So there's a lot of personal characteristics that we can say it would be much better, nicer for myself and for the other if I was more perfect, if I had more good points and less bad points. So if we approach spirituality with the idea that it's about becoming a saint, which essentially means becoming perfect and delivering only pleasure and being, a model person, essentially we're probably still attached to outcomes and not looking at what is really available to the human being as human happiness. And so that's why it's pointed out, this really isn't about becoming a better person, rather about our attitude towards how we function in each moment and how the other functions in each moment. And so that's a very important point. And because it's a very important point, that tends to be emphasized. It's about our attitude to the circumstance. And then this is where it gets a bit contentious, because in history, there's plenty of examples of teachers and sages, or some people would say, well, so-called sages, who find themselves in a circumstance, deliver pain to the other, or function in a way that society or some people in society say is unacceptable, is immoral, shouldn't be that way. And then get sort of questioned by the seekers or by so-and-so and say, you can't say that you're liberated and this, and then still function in these immoral ways. This is where it starts to get a bit tricky, because the question is, what is the understanding and what effect does it have on a human being? When we look at human unhappiness and we define it as being the uncomfortableness of guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation, then human happiness is the dissolving of that attitude to how things happen in life. And if that attitude dissolves, and yet there is still, it's the body karma or the person's destiny to find themselves in, a sex scandal or a money scandal or a political scandal, then if their attitude is one of non-doership and non-attachment, but I don't mean an attitude that is just a convenient attitude, but I mean a real attitude of non-doership and non-attachment, where the attitude of doership and attachment has fallen away, then for that person, the one that is maybe at the center of the controversy, there is no guilt and blame and pride and worry and expectation. So there is happiness. So that, on the one hand, is liberation from suffering. Now, it has to be genuine. It has to be the real deal for there not to be guilt, blame, pride, worry, and expectation. So the absence of guilt is not where we have some psychological idea that says, I'm not the doer, too bad, so sad, you got hurt, it's all God's will. It's not, that's more where the understanding is being used as an excuse in a sense, and it's not real understanding. Now, when a sage finds themselves in that situation where there's a scandal and they're asked the question, why did you function like that? Why did you behave like that? They might still find themselves in the role of a teacher and say, well, you asked the question. The real answer is, I found myself in a situation, and that is the way that the body moved. That is the impulses that came up, the decisions that got made in that moment were such that the outcome was what is in front of us now. And the way I see it is I couldn't have acted differently. Now, when that's heard by someone that's been hurt, or even a society that sees that as inappropriate, it's heard as an excuse. It's heard as, oh, that's very convenient. And the truth is, the sage might actually be describing their deep relationship to life. And if the tables were turned, where pain was delivered to them, that's the attitude that they would have, that's destiny unfolding. It's not pleasure. It's not what they would choose if they had a choice. But that's what's happened. It's argued that certain immoral, or what are deemed to be immoral acts, are driven by deeply ingrained unresolved issues that still exist in the system. And so from that point of view, someone can argue the understanding isn't total because there are still remnants of doership and attachment to outcome in the system. And that's what's driving the body-mind organism towards pleasure in a way that it can't be controlled, where there's no moral compass that says, no, that's not where to go. And that might be a valid argument, but it doesn't mean that there isn't a fair degree or even a very strong degree of understanding in that person. It doesn't mean that that person isn't a valid teacher. It might mean that their process is not complete. And if it's deemed that their process is not complete, then some people might say, I'm not interested in listening to what they have to say. It could be that their process is complete, but you just don't like their personality or the way they behave. And that's valid also. You say, well, maybe they've got an understanding, but I'm going to find someone I resonate with because I just don't like that behavior. So that's what can happen. And what also can happen is that we find that we do become a better person. We do find that our moral standards get better. We do find that because the attachment to outcome on many levels has been uprooted, that we just simply don't find ourselves drawn to situations that we might have been drawn into previously. That if someone is projecting onto us some fascination or attraction, that we find we don't have a reciprocating urge or desire to fulfill something. And so we find that we don't get drawn into situations that are likely to turn into problematic situations because someone is, the other is trying to get something from a psychological point of view, and maybe not doing what's best for them, etc., etc. So the answer is that we probably do find, or you could, as a general rule, you will find that there is a moral improvement and the person becoming a better person. And on what's more important is not to look at that as happiness for the human being. That is, in a way, a byproduct where, on top of the fact that there is no attitudinal suffering, that we find that there is less pain from awkward situations. So that's the best I can, the best I can give you, I'm afraid.
Well, that's a great answer. I needed. That's exactly what I needed to hear.
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm not even going to add anything to that.